In the kitchen, I scraped burnt rice from the bottom of the pot. The metal scratched louder than usual. I didn't stop. The sound filled the house. The urn was still on the mantel. I hadn't moved it. I didn't want to. They said he left a note. I said I didn't care. But last night, I opened his laptop, and I saw something I wasn't meant to read. Living room dusk, dust dancing in the dim light. I sat stiff on the old recliner, facing the mantel. The urn was still there. Same spot. I hadn't touched it. A fine layer of dust had started to settle on the base. I thought about wiping it off, but my hands stayed clenched in my lap. The TV was on, muted. Some game show flickered across the screen. I hadn't changed the channel in 3 days. The smell of overcooked rice lingered from earlier. I'd let the pot burn again. My throat was dry. I hadn't drunk much water today, or yesterday. She'll never step foot in this house again. I said it out loud. Just to hear something. My voice sounded cracked, like it didn't belong to me. The urn didn't respond. 2 weeks, that's how long it's been since Alex died. 2 weeks since I got the call at 3:17 in the morning. The kind of call that doesn't come unless something's gone wrong. I remember the voice. Flat. Professional. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your son..." And then the rest turned into noise. I dropped the phone, bent down to pick it up. My knees cracked. I stayed on the floor for a long time. After that, they said he was found in the garage, car running, windows closed. They called it peaceful. I don't think there's anything peaceful about quitting life. Dana came to the funeral, wore black, didn't cry. She stood by the door like a guest, like someone who barely knew him. Not a wife. Just an intruder. I didn't speak to her. I couldn't. I'd warned him, told him not to marry her, told him she was cold. Quiet in the wrong way, always looking out the window when people talked to her. Never cooked, never called, never gave me grandkids. He said she made him feel calm. I told him calm isn't love. He said I was too hard on her. I told him he was blind. Now he's gone, and I know why. It was her, it had to be. People don't just break. Not like that, not without someone pushing them. I shifted in the chair. My back ached. The room felt smaller than usual. Or maybe I was just shrinking. The silence pressed against my chest. I thought about the last time he was here. 4 days before it happened. He stood right where I was looking now, in front of the fireplace, holding his coffee, smiling too much, blinking too slow. We didn't talk long. I'd asked if he was eating well. He laughed. Said Dana had learned to make lasagna. I rolled my eyes. He looked tired. I remember that now. Before he left, he hugged me. Longer than usual. Too long. His hand touched the back of my neck. Firm. Like a goodbye. I didn't say anything then. I just stood there, arms loose at my sides. And then he was gone. I hadn't looked at his things since. His office upstairs still looked the same. I was going to clean it today. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought I'd find something. Maybe I just needed a reason to walk into a room that didn't look at me like a grave. I stood up, knees stiff, palms pressed against my thighs for balance. The urn stayed where it was. I turned toward the hallway, toward the stairs. Some part of me wanted to stop, but another part, the one I hadn't listened to in a long time, told me to go. I didn't know yet what I was walking toward. Church hallway after the memorial. Fluorescent lights flickering. The hallway smelled like old hymn books and dust. A kid's voice echoed from somewhere. Too loud, too alive. The service had ended 20 minutes ago, but people were still milling around, hands stuffed in pockets, holding paper cups of burnt coffee. Whispering. I walked slowly, my shoes sticking slightly to the waxed linoleum. The flowers in my hand had started to wilt. Then I saw her. Dana, standing alone by the bulletin board. A list of Sunday school events pinned behind her. Bright construction paper with crooked letters. Her head was down. She was reading something or pretending to. She wore black. Of course she did. But the scarf around her neck was cream-colored, soft and expensive-looking. I stared at it too long. She didn't notice me at first. My chest tightened. Why is she here? What does she want? She didn't belong. Not after what she did. I walked up. The hallway felt narrower than before. The light above her head flickered once, twice. She turned as I approached. Her eyes were red, but her face was blank. I stopped 2 feet away, close enough for her to hear me without me having to raise my voice. You shouldn't be here. She didn't speak. I waited, nothing, so I said it. Haven't you done enough? There it was, the pause. Her mouth opened, just slightly, like she might say something, but she didn't. A few heads turned. One of the choir ladies whispered something behind her hand. Dana looked down, then back up at me. Her throat moved like she swallowed something sharp. I didn't... No, I said, and don't. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let anything fall. She just nodded. Once. Tight. Then she turned and walked away. Not fast, not slow. Just like someone who knew better than to answer. The scarf slipped a little as she moved, showing the edge of her collarbone. I didn't know why that made me angry. I stood there for a long moment. Then someone touched my arm. It was Margaret, the neighbor across the street, the one who always watered her lawn at 6 a.m., even in winter. She leaned in, voice low. Maybe it's not what you think, Mary. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then at her face. She looked tired. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned away, walked back toward the main room. The chairs were half empty now. A few people were stacking programs. Someone spilled something near the podium, a dark stain spreading into the carpet. My legs felt heavy. The flowers I'd carried were drooping. Alex's picture was still up front, framed, smiling. I stared at it. He looked younger in that photo. Softer. Dana took that picture. I remember. On his birthday 2 years ago. He didn't even like cake, but she'd made one. Chocolate with the raspberries. He'd laughed. That was rare. I'd said something that day. Something about how she dressed too plain for a celebration. She smiled, ignored it. I thought she was arrogant. Now, I wondered what he'd said to her after I left. I pushed the memory away. She broke him. That's the truth, isn't it? Someone placed a chair upside down on a table, legs pointing up like bones. I turned back toward the hallway. Dana was gone. Alex's old office the night after the ceremony. Stale air, blinds half closed. The doorknob stuck for a second before it gave way. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me first. Paint. Something sour beneath it, maybe old coffee. I hadn't been in this room since the day we moved him back in after college. It still looked like a boy's space trying to grow into a man's. The desk was cluttered, but in neat piles. Sketchbooks stacked, pencils lined up, receipts folded into the corners. The light above buzzed faintly. I didn't turn it on. I moved to the bookshelf, dust coated everything. I started wiping, slowly. One shelf at a time. Keep your hands moving. Don't think. Just clean. A plastic cup tipped and rolled to the edge. I caught it before it fell. My nails scraped against the wood as I steadied it. Behind the row of books, I found a photo frame. Turned face down. I flipped it over. Alex and Dana, somewhere outdoors. He had his arm around her, both of them squinting into the sun. He looked alive. I set the frame down without turning it back. My shoulders ached. I reached up to stretch and caught sight of the easel in the corner. A canvas still sat on it, half finished. Or maybe finished, but unfinished in feeling. Thick, jagged strokes in dark blue, black, something almost red bleeding in between. No shape, no subject. Frantic. I walked closer, ran my hand along the side of the frame. The paint had dried, but it looked wet. I didn't know he'd been working on something. He hadn't shown me anything in months. I looked around. A stool sat nearby. A smudge of paint on the seat, like he'd sat there long enough to press himself into it. My hand drifted toward the brush jar. Dried bristles, one still damp. Let me take care of your things, son. I'll keep what matters. I said it aloud. The words floated in the air, unanswered. I turned to the desk. Opened the first drawer. Receipts, pens, a broken phone charger. The second drawer had notebooks, blank pages, some with corners dog-eared. One had a sketch of a treehouse he used to talk about building. The third drawer was harder to open. I tugged, and it came loose with a sharp creak. Inside, near the back, was his laptop. Closed, but the lid wasn't shut all the way, slightly ajar. I stared at it. It looked out of place, too modern, too alive. I reached out, then pulled my hand back. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, or what I was afraid of. A spider crawled across the desk. I killed it with a folder, wiped my hand on my jeans. I looked back at the laptop. It was still there, waiting. I stood still, barely breathing. Then I stepped away, opened the closet instead. Went back to folding old hoodies, smoothing out jeans, organizing socks like it mattered. But my eyes kept drifting back. That screen, that sliver of space between the lid and the base, just wide enough to hold something. The room felt tighter now. The painting loomed larger. I put the cloth down, sat in the desk chair. It creaked under me. I reached for the laptop and stopped. I wasn't ready yet. But I would be. Maybe tomorrow, or maybe tonight. Same office, midnight, just the laptop screen, lighting her face. I sat still for a long time before touching the lid. Outside, the neighborhood was asleep. No cars, no sounds. Just the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me and the buzz from the screen waiting to glow. I opened it. The screen lit up, cold and blue against the dark. No password. It loaded straight into the desktop. His email was still open. Inbox full of unread junk. One tab blinked. Drafts. 1. I hovered the mouse. My finger twitched. Don't open it. It's not your place. But my hand moved on its own. 1 click. The message opened. No subject line. No recipient filled in. Just lines. Words. His. I'm sorry, Mom. I can't do this anymore. I just wanted you to stop trying to fix me. My lungs forgot what they were for. I'm not broken. I'm just tired. My fingers froze on the keyboard. You always said she changed me. But it was you, Mom. Something hot crawled into my chest. You never let me grow. Never let me breathe. The cursor blinked under the last line. He never hit send. I stared. Blinked once. Read it again. Then again. Each time the words got louder. I didn't notice I was gripping the desk until my fingers cramped. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence screamed. He had written it for me. For me. All this time, I thought I'd been saving him. Every warning, every visit, every fight. I thought it came from love. But this was the truth. You never let me breathe. My hand reached for the mouse again. I scrolled. There was nothing more. No sign-off. No goodbye. Just that last line, like a breath cut short. The painting in the corner looked different now. It wasn't frantic. It was suffocating. I whispered, No. But the screen didn't care. I pushed the chair back. It scraped hard against the floor. I stood. My legs shook, walked in circles. Twice. My reflection in the window looked foreign. I sat back down, read the draft again. The edges of my vision blurred, not from tears, not yet, but from pressure. Inside, cracking. My hands trembled. I placed them in my lap, pressed them together, held still. The air in the room turned thin. I remembered the first time he lied to me. He was 7, said he hadn't broken the lamp in the hallway. His voice shook. His hands were behind his back. He was always afraid of disappointing me. I thought I taught him to be strong. Maybe I just taught him to hide. The screen dimmed. I moved the mouse, read it again. I didn't know what to do with the words, couldn't scream, couldn't cry. So I whispered again. No. But the truth didn't move, didn't bend, didn't care. I closed the laptop, held it in my arms like something fragile. It was too late to answer. Bathroom mirror, dawn, light flickers above the sink. The mirror was fogged, even though I hadn't run the water yet. Or maybe it was just me. I stood there, hands on porcelain, fingers stiff, cold. The light above buzzed, flickered once, then steadied into something sickly yellow. My reflection looked unfamiliar. Hair tangled, lips cracked, collar twisted to one side. I hadn't changed clothes since yesterday. Maybe longer. My eyes looked hollow. Dark underneath, like bruises. Say it. Say it out loud. The words sat in my mouth like pins. I gripped the sink. Hard, bone on porcelain. My jaw trembled. My legs didn't feel solid. My knees bent slightly, and I leaned in. The mirror didn't flinch. I said it. It wasn't her. It was me. It didn't echo. It didn't sound like a confession. Just breath and sound, broken in two. I turned away from the mirror, sat on the edge of the tub. My phone was still in my sweater pocket. I pulled it out, unlocked it, opened the message thread. Alex, the last text I ever sent him. She's making you distant. You never come around anymore. I guess we're just not important now. No reply. I scrolled up. Dozens of messages. Why didn't you call this weekend? I heard you went to her mother's for Thanksgiving. I guess I don't matter anymore. Don't forget what I did for you. Orders, accusations, guilt wrapped up as care. Very few said, I love you. Even fewer asked if he was okay. I felt a tightening in my throat, but I didn't cry. Just stared. I remembered the funeral. Dana standing there in the aisle. Dress plain, face pale. She'd tried to approach me. Had opened her mouth. Mary, and I'd cut her off. Sharp. Loud enough for others to hear. I don't want to hear it. You don't speak for him. She'd nodded. Stepped back. Didn't try again. I thought I was protecting Alex's memory. But maybe I was protecting myself. From the truth. From knowing that while I blamed her, my son had been drowning under the weight of me. I stood again, looked at myself one more time. There was no comfort in the reflection. Only a woman who had spent too many years confusing possession for love. I opened the drawer beside the sink, fumbled through. Old makeup, expired creams, a cracked hairbrush. At the bottom, the photo. Alex as a boy, maybe 10, holding a drawing he'd made. Stick figures. One with long hair labeled Mom, the other, me, a red heart between them. Back then, everything I did made him smile. Back then, love was simple. When did I start thinking love meant control? I held the photo to my chest, not for warmth, but because I needed something to press against the hollow space where belief used to be. The light above flickered again. I didn't move. I knew what I had to do. But knowing and doing weren't the same. Not yet. Apartment hallway outside Dana's door. Cold. Rain tapping the window. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and someone's leftover takeout. The kind of smell that clings to old buildings and broken things. I didn't bring an umbrella. Didn't bring anything, really. Just a manila folder clutched tight to my chest. Rainwater dripped from my sleeves. My hair stuck to my cheeks. I stood in front of her door longer than I should have. Long enough to feel foolish. She won't open, and maybe I deserve that. Still, I knocked, soft, then again. Footsteps, a hesitation. The sound of a chain sliding free. Then the door opened a crack. Dana. Hair pulled back, no makeup, eyes wary. Like she expected a fight. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. I just held the folder out. My hands trembled slightly. She looked at it, then back at me. I waited. Lips pressed tight, the way people do when they're afraid their mouth might betray them. Slowly, she reached out and took it. Her eyes scanned the page, line by line. Her breathing changed. Not louder, just slower. Measured. She reached the end, looked up. Rain tapped harder against the window at the end of the hall. I opened my mouth, the words scratched on the way out. I'm sorry, I blamed you because I couldn't face what I did. I thought she might close the door. She didn't. She leaned against the edge of it, one hand still holding the folder. Her face didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. "I didn't know he wrote that," she said quietly. "I found it the night after the memorial." She nodded once, kept her eyes on mine. There was a pause, long, wide enough to fit everything we never said to each other. "I thought I was helping him," I said. "All those years. I thought I was doing right." Dana's hand tightened around the paper. "I know," she said. "Not kindly, not cruelly, just as a fact." I looked down. My shoes left wet marks on the floor. "I won't ask you to forgive me," I said. "I wouldn't." She didn't answer. The silence stretched again. Behind her, the apartment was dim. I caught the corner of a couch, a lamp, a blanket thrown over the side. It smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee. A life. Still happening. I realized I didn't know what I wanted her to say or do. I just needed her to know that I saw it now, that I was done pretending I hadn't. I stepped back. She didn't move. I waited. Her hand dropped to her side, folder still in it. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She didn't forgive me. She didn't invite me in. But she didn't close the door either, and somehow that was enough. I turned and walked back down the hallway. Each step felt like peeling skin, but I didn't stop. Back in Alex's office. Night. One lamp on. The bulb hummed. Yellow light pooled on the desk like something spilled. Everything else stayed in shadow. I sat in his chair, the same one I hadn't touched in weeks. The cushion still dipped slightly where he used to sit. Not deep, just enough to remind me he'd once been there. The printed email lay on the desk in front of me, creased at the corners now, damp from the rain, smudged slightly where my fingers had pressed too hard. I read it once more. Not for understanding. That had already come. Just to remember the shape of his voice. "I'm not broken. I'm just tired." I folded the page slowly, lined the edges up with care. I didn't cry. I placed it in the top drawer next to his sketchbook. Closed it. Gently. The click was small but final. I leaned back, let my arms fall to my lap, let my eyes rest on the half-finished painting still propped on the easel. It didn't look chaotic anymore. It looked quiet, like he was trying to say something without words. I breathed in through my nose. Stale air. Faint traces of turpentine and old carpet. I hadn't changed anything in here, and I wouldn't, but I wouldn't pretend anymore. I can't change it. But I can stop lying. I looked around the room like it was the last time, not to memorize it, just to accept it. My hands stayed still, my eyes stared ahead. Hollow, but open. There were no more accusations left in me, no more names to blame. I whispered into the quiet, "I thought I lost my son." The words dropped into the room like stones. I waited, nothing answered. I closed my eyes, opened them, looked again at the empty chair across from me, the one he used to sit in when we argued. Then the second half came, soft, steady. But he was already gone, long before he died. The room didn't change. The world didn't shift. But something in me lowered its fists. I turned off the lamp. The dark settled fast. Not peaceful, not kind, just quiet. And in that quiet, I finally listened. Fade to black.